Welcome to this short presentation. My name is Nina Suter and I'd like to express my profound gratitude to the CHMIT and the Society for Musicology in Ireland for giving me this opportunity. My undergraduate dissertation examined the four structurally oppressed characters in Mozart's Entführung aus dem Serail, the Orientalised Turkish figures Osmin and Selim, and the European women Blonde and Konstanze. I would like to present an excerpt from my chapter on Blonde and Konstanze, given the centrality which Mozart and Stephanie's adaptation of Brezner's original libretto accorded the fidelity test in which they figure. Mozart's insistence on the augmented role of female constancy must be situated within his working context of Josephinian Vienna of the 1780s, and what Ford calls the institutional secularization of moral authority. The Viennese society of the late 18th century was a society very much in flux, moving from the residues of the providential and feudal stability of medieval society to the greater social mobility of capitalism. The project of a national Singspiel was intended as a social stabilizer by its promotion of a unifying local culture combined with Enlightenment ideals of high morality. Female constancy is the central virtue in the recurring storyline of the fidelity plot, a fitting virtue to the uncertain and changing times experienced by Josephinian Vienna. The story of the woman preserving and guarding her constancy as the male hero searches for her provides the unmoored, newly liberated individual with comfort and a promise of security. Yet rather than a timeless moral allegory, the concept of constancy gained sexual connotations in the 18th century and was turned into a specifically gendered construct by patriarchal gender functionalism. With the bourgeois projection of morality onto women and the domestic sphere, the newly capitalist absolute states thus ensured the necessary freedom in the male public domains of economy and politics. This functional gendered construct was propounded by the sexual double standard surrounding chastity. Inheritance of property and purity of bloodline depended not on male, but on female constancy and chastity. A patriarchal society, insecure in its moral authority and validity, thus depended on the virtue of its women, linking morality with femininity through the governing virtue of constancy. The opera's most extensive defense of constancy is Konstanze's famous Matan aller Arten, in which she confirms this patriarchal virtue while simultaneously undermining expectations of femininity. Given the aria's renown, I'd like to instead focus on Blonde, who, given her lesser social status and explicitly emancipatory character, is a freer agent within the opera. In contrast to Konstanze's male-centered Seria character, Blonde is largely independent and constantly upends patriarchal expectations. Refusing to conform to a limiting gender identity, she is mobile and flexible, trying on different masks in carnivalesque spirit. Thus, she manages to temporarily suspend social and gendered hierarchies in her interactions with Osmin and Pedrillo. While Konstanze frames her own defense through her position of dependence on another man by appealing to her loyalty to Belmonte, Blonde uses both her female relationship with Konstanze, the assertion of her independent free will, and her confident vocal displays to mimic, match, and eventually overpower Osmin. Failing to drive Osmin away with flirtatious artifice and the elaborate codes of gallantry in her aria Durch Zärtlichkeit, Blonde again proclaims her Englishness and her insistence on Enlightenment progressivity. Blonde declares, "Girls are not wares to give away. I am an Englishwoman born to freedom and defy anyone who wants to force me to do something." Not limited to gallantry and Enlightenment rhetoric, Blonde does not hesitate to threaten physical violence. Thus she reverses their hierarchic roles. You are our slaves. The scene's climactic duet both stages the clash between two cultures and functions as a love duet, as there is no such duet between Blonde and Pedrillo. Traversing more than 2 octaves in the space of 3 bars, Blonde negotiates Osmin's sexual threat by imitating the signs of his authority. Isolated by their comical length and depth in the flux of the duet, her low notes mimic Osmin's exaggerated bodily presence, exposing his authority as a performative effect, a rhetoric that she, in her discursive versatility, can assume at will. When Osmin changes his strategy by altering mode, tempo, and effect in the G minor andante, Blonde trumps him, embellishing his melody and making it her own. Blonde explicitly stresses the freedom of Western women in comparison with the opera's absent harem. The harem functions as an abstract allegory of despotism, equating male desire with power over weak and passive women. Blonde's profession of the freedom of Western women serve a classic Orientalist function which juxtaposes the bigger, exoticized evil with the smaller evil of the Western self, rhetorically diminishing the latter. In relation to its concealed Turkish occupants, the harem signifies Orientalized despotism. But in relation to European captives, the harem's thrall is nullified and turned into the investigative tool for the superior male Europeans. Race thus impinges on the seemingly straightforward gender binary of the harem and its power dynamic. The limitations of the European women's freedom become obvious in the final quartet of Act 2. Before plans of escape can be hatched, they must prove their constancy. Victims of the opera's preliminary abduction plot, Blonde and Konstanze are nonetheless interrogated with suspicion by their male counterparts, whose utmost concern, more pressing than freeing the captives, consists of the women's preserved sexual faithfulness. Serving as repositories for societal morality and counterweights to male immorality, Blonde and Konstanze continue to be captives to patriarchal expectations of gendered virtue and fidelity. Their responses to the men's accusations are, however, profoundly different. Whereas Konstanze weeps, Blonde's defiant and even violent resistance literally enlightens the distrustful Pedrillo, whom she declares is not worthy of her. Refusing to subjugate herself to appease male sexual jealousy, she delivers her lines in a defiant, provocative counterpoint, whose skittish triple time contrasts sharply with the common time and legato phrases of the other 3. She refuses what Ford describes as the fate of empty representations of Enlightenment women, to be dominated and harnessed to the desires of an active male reason. On the contrary, it is Pedrillo who is enlightened by Blonde. The independent Blonde temporarily refuses to consent to periodic regularity. After the men beg for forgiveness, Blonde follows Konstanze's lead, reverting to her conventional place as secondary woman. Her active resistance gives way to passive compliance, as her individual character is subsumed into the collective moralizing befitting the didactic maxime which resolves the Singspiel's inner drama. The social, ethnic and gendered status quo, which is reinstated during the Singspiel's 2 finales, aims to contain the mutability that accompanied the ideological shifts, social mobility and changing gender relations that were part of the embourgeoisement of society. Yet the Singspiel's Enlightenment maximes are threatened by operatic reversals of normative ideology through Blonde's defiance of oppressive male domination and Osmin's carnivalesque exoticism. Their powerful production of presence and resistance constitutes a subversive escape into a spirit of counter-enlightenment. The didactic lieto fine is preceded and followed by carnivalesque escape, whose cathartic discharge of destructive energies simultaneously reverses and confirms Enlightenment values. The finale's moralistic European community is reflective of the Nationalsingspiel's goal, but also of imperialist exclusion and suppression of the other. Masked as unpolitical, imaginative pleasure, Orientalism nonetheless envisions, constructs, and ultimately controls its others, be they racial, gendered, sexual, or social, through the dual workings of knowledge and power.